Okay, so this is basically going to be basically on, do you guys know the ACSM? It's the American College of Sports Medicine, and they put out a lot of guidelines basically for training. So I'm just going to go over that, over exercise adaptations that apply to this class through kind of the ACSM lens. So it'll be using a lot of the content that we've learned here, especially like heart related stuff. And then, yeah, if you guys have any questions, ask them. But hopefully this is kind of creates a blend between working out or exercise and A&P2, because it's useful stuff. So, general adaptations to exercise, or general cardiac adaptations to exercise. What happens when you work out? So when you work out, you obviously need your muscles to work, right? And in order for your muscles to work, there needs to be blood supplying them to give them the nutrients they need to function. So in order to get blood to your muscles, a few different things will happen. The first one is that your heart rate will increase. If your heart rate increases, you'll pump more blood, right, per minute. So that means there's more blood available to your muscles. Stroke volume will increase. So stroke volume is the amount of blood that's pumped per beat. So I think Donna references ejection fraction a lot in class. Similar concept, a little bit different, but it's basically just the amount of blood that gets pumped out every time the heart contracts will go up as well. And then cardiac output will increase, which is the amount of blood that gets pumped through your heart per minute, basically. So, yeah, and then larger percentage of cardiac output gets directed toward muscles and skin. So you're gonna have, like, the body has to direct, when you're at rest, most of the blood will go to your guts to like digest food, your brain, so you can think. When you exercise, it's going to get redirected to muscles, and the way you do that is like the vessels that supply your guts will vasoconstrict, so it's harder for blood to flow there, and then the vessels that go to your muscles will vasodilate, so they'll get bigger, so more blood can go that way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Does that concept make sense? Mm-hmm. So more, basically, take something away from this slide. When you exercise, more blood needs to get to the muscles.
Not to the guts.
Not to the guts, right? It'll take away from the guts. So, heart rate max is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the maximum number of times your heart can beat in a minute. And then the different ways of training with light intent, or something you're going lower intensity, usually for a longer duration of time. That will take place in between 57 and 63% of your heart rate max. And then moderate intent exercise will be 64 to 76% of your heart rate max, and then high intent exercise is 77 to 95%. This is generally for cardiovascular training, because if you're training for a different purpose, like if you're training to get stronger, faster, whatever, heart rate's probably not going to be a great indicator that you're making those adaptations successfully, because obviously you're training for a different purpose, right? So if you're training for endurance or just health in general, or doing some type of cardio, these are good guidelines to follow, because they'll give you an idea of how intensely you're training. Because if you're to load a bunch of weight on your back, right, and do a back squat, like you can push a lot, very high intent, but your heart rate might not be elevated as much as it would be here. You know what I mean? And then, yeah, some methods of measuring for resistance training are slightly different. ACSM heart rate equations, so don't really need to know these. These are just kind of different concepts. So heart rate reserve is your heart rate, the maximum heart rate you can achieve minus your resting heart rate. So it's basically just the difference that it's your working range, essentially. Where should I be within this range to give myself the exercise intensity that I'm looking for? And target heart rate is that, so it's heart rate reserve times intensity plus heart rate at rest. So that'll give you, basically, if you're looking to train at 75% intensity, just plug your 75% in there, figure out your heart rate reserve and your heart rate rest data, and then it'll give you a target heart rate. And then heart rate max is 220 minus age. That one actually is pretty useful. I do have a practice problem later in the slides, not for any credit or anything, but just to get concepts, and you need to know that equation. But it's easy. So, how old are you?
20.
So what's your max heart rate?
200.
Bang.
199.
Nice. Perfect. Oh, practice problem. All right, Jimmy is 43 years old. He's 6'3", 310 pounds, and has no experience with exercise. He wants to start doing some cardio. What heart rate should he be training at? This is it's very open-ended. There's not a right answer. I just want you to I want you to think through why you might give him one type of intensity level.
Well, I wouldn't want him at a max heart rate because he has no experience or exercise. He'd probably pass out.
Right. So you'd keep her on the lighter intense side.
For sure.
Right, and if his age is 43, and light intent is 57 to 63% of heart rate max, what's the heart rate range? You probably need to take out a piece of paper, calculate it. You guys don't do this if you want. Just for fun.
I don't really understand how to do that anyway.
Oh, okay. So heart rate max 220 minus age, right? We said Jimmy is 43. So Jimmy's maximum heart rate is 177. And then if you want to start him at a light intent exercise, you would say, okay, light intent exercise is 57 to 63% of your heart rate max. So Jimmy's heart rate max is 177 BPM. So let's multiply 0.57 times 177 to get the low end, and then 0.63 times 177 to get the high end. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Or did I also explain that too fast?
1.57. A little fast.
Okay. All right. So you understand the concept of heart rate max,
Yes.
right? Okay. And then you understand why we want him at light intent? Okay. And if light intent is 57 to 63% of your heart rate max, to find his heart, like the range that you want his heart rate to stay within, you multiply his heart rate max times those percentages.
And you get his heart rate max by doing 220 minus his age.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. What'd you get, Aaron?
For light intent, I got 129.
Cool.
For high intent, 136.3.
For the high end of the light intent? Okay. Nice. Sounds good to me. Jade, we're just going over basically, remember the weight room open lab last year? Similar concepts except A&P2 stuff.
Okay.
So a lot more like cardio focused. Got it? Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Okay, and then Fit VP are just 6 variables to monitor that you can kind of use to mix up or use as guidelines when you're programming for somebody. Frequency, intensity, time, type, volume, and progression. So frequency is like, okay, how often am I going to be doing this exercise, or how often am I going to be training in general? Intensity is how hard are you going to be trying, what's your effort level. Time is how long are we going to be training for. Type is like what type of exercise, resistance training, cardio, sprint work, power work. Volume, how much are we going to do? Are we going to do 8 sets of 5, so we're going 40 total reps, or are we going to go 2 sets of 3, so we have 6 total reps? Volume. And then progression, over time, you want to make sure that you're challenging yourself and doing more than you did in the past, so that you continue to make adaptations, continue to get better at whatever you're trying to get better at. Very general, but all stuff that is good to account for. Energy systems. This is a big focus in XPhys, which is a class I believe a lot of you will take next year. Does that sound right, next year? So this energy systems basically is the way that your body produces energy. So you have your ATP PCR system. You guys know ATP is like energy, right? In a very general sense. So ATP, PCR. So you start with a phosphocreatine, that's your PCR, and then that phosphate ion will break off the creatine, bond with an ADP molecule to create ATP, right? Adenosine diphosphate plus a phosphate is adenosine triphosphate. So you have ATP, you have energy. Glycolysis is a lot more complicated, a lot longer of a process, but also you will create ATP and some other stuff, but ATP is a product of that. And then aerobic systems, also longer, but you're using oxygen to create the ATP. So the first 2 you do not need oxygen for. The last one you do. And they all work through different timelines. So ATP PCR is going to be like your high intent, like maybe if I'm doing like a 10-yard sprint, something very short duration, but usually there's a very high output associated with it, whether it's power, force, velocity, whatever it is. Glycolysis is like your middle. Maybe I'm doing like interval training or some type of tempo run, whatever it may be. That's going to be your 15-second to 2-minute range, and then aerobic systems is going to be your 2 minutes plus. So that's like going on a long jog, a bike, a swim, whatever it is. That's when you start utilizing oxygen to make energy. Anaerobic just means without oxygen. So examples of this, as I said before, this is your ATP PCR and your glycolysis. Resistance training, power training, speed work, basically just anything with a high output where you're trying to push either a lot of force into the ground or whatever, something you're trying really hard to do over a short duration of time. Should be performed in shorter bursts to limit fatigue. Because if you're fatigued trying to work velocity, you're not sprinting fast in the first place because you're fatigued. How much faster are you going to get? So those are done in where fatigue is not really a limiting factor. Chronic cardiovascular adaptations to or anaerobic training increase myocardial mass. So as you think, like if you're trying to lift something heavy, like think resistance training. In order to produce a lot of force, you have to create a lot of pressure, right? And as you create a lot of pressure, blood pressure will go up. So your heart has to contract stronger, right? Because remember, Donna talks about like pressure gradients is what drives blood flow. So if there's a global increase in pressure in my system, then there has to be a greater amount of pressure created in the heart to overcome that. Does that make sense? So pressure gradient is just a difference in pressure. So if my blood pressure goes up, then the pressure I'm pushing the heart with also has to go up to ensure that blood flow is always going. So in order to do that, I'm going to increase the size of my heart muscle or increase the myocardial mass so that I can squeeze the heart with more force. Which will lead to an increased contractility or increased contractile force, which will increase the amount of blood that gets shot out every time it contracts, which is your stroke volume. And then because you're pumping more blood each beat, your heart rate has the ability to decrease because if I need to pump X amount of blood, but I'm pumping more blood per beat, I can pump less beats per minute. Does that make sense? Because each beat will pump more blood. Right? And then increased metabolic rate. You'll have more calories burned at rest, higher energy levels, just because the body is better at utilizing like your carbs, fats, but like the substrates you utilize to create energy with. Your body is better at utilizing those substances. So, yes, basically. Aerobic examples. These are stuff that aerobic means with oxygen. So these are the examples of exercise that you will utilize oxygen to create energy with. LSD training is long, slow distance training. So running, biking, swimming, whatever it is, long distance, long duration. HIIT training, sexy style of exercise according to Dr. Soon. Dr. Soon is the one who taught the A&P2 class but is on sabbatical. She also taught XPhys. And she always referred to HIIT training as the sexy style of training because that got attention from a lot of people as it became more popular, especially in recent years. So, 2 examples of training that do require oxygen. Chronic cardiovascular adaptations to exercise training, to aerobic training. So you'll have increased left ventricular volume. So different than resistance, instead of having more myocardial mass, right, because you're contracting against more pressure, you're going to increase the volume that you can fill with to pump more blood. So basically, the end result is a decreased resting heart rate, but the means by which you get there are different based on the type of training. You'll have an increased preload because the ventricle can, the extensibility is increased. So it can fill with more blood, and then because it fills with more blood, it can pump out more blood, and then because it pumps out more blood, it can beat less. Increases oxidative capacity or your ability to utilize oxygen. That makes sense, right? The more you utilize oxygen for energy, the better you become at it, which is increased ATP production, decreases recovery time chronically between bouts, and quicker recovery of your ATP PCR system. This is something that I found really interesting this summer because especially as a baseball player, you never think cardio is necessarily helpful or practical for a baseball player, but quicker recovery of your ATP PCR system means in between swings, if you're hitting, or in between pitches on the mound, you'll create more energy or more ATP in between that time so you can utilize it better each individual throw. So basically you'll recover quicker instead of being fatigued over time. which I thought was pretty cool because I never thought conditioning was really important.
And that's why you guys have to run poles sometimes.
Well, that's a punishment usually, but on the Wednesday training at the end, I put a conditioning block in there, like with the med ball scoops and the kettlebell swings for pitchers.
Oh.
Yeah, get that oxidative
You
capacity.
should do something for the hitters too.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah, decrease recovery time chronically between bouts, quicker recovery, ATP. Sorry, good. Okay, exercise impact on blood pressure. This one's a little bit more complicated. How many of you took A&P1 already? One person, perfect. So exercise stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight system. You have your fight and flight system, and you have your rest and digest. So obviously we know what fight and flight is, but then your parasympathetic system is your rest and digest, which basically means I'm relaxed, I'm going to digest my food better. Because you're stimulating your fight or flight or your SMS, you'll release adrenaline, so epinephrine, norepinephrine, and nitric oxide and prostaglandins are released into the blood. What this does is it basically prepares you, obviously those are hormones, right? It prepares you for exercise, which causes global vasoconstriction, increasing blood pressure acutely, so your vessels will shrink to increase your blood pressure. And after exercise, your sympathetic nervous system activity drops, right? Because it was spiked, it's going to come back to baseline, close to baseline. And then because you're leaving your fight or flight system, your adrenaline levels will drop, so your epinephrine and norepinephrine, but your nitric oxide and prostaglandin levels remain above baseline. And what that does is those two hormones being elevated will create a global vasodilation, so increasing the size of your blood vessels or the diameter of your blood vessels, which reduces blood pressure. Because blood pressure is, as your blood flows through your vessels, it's going to push on the sides, right? Like as, what's an example? Like water sitting in your water bottle is sitting there, but it's pushing against the sides, right? Mm-hmm. So as blood flows through the vessels, it pushes on the sides. And basically the amount of force, in a general sense, that it's pushing with is your pressure, is the blood pressure. Mm-hmm. So if there's more space for the blood to flow through, it doesn't need to push as hard because they can just go straight. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's being squeezed less, so it's pushing back on the loop or the walls of the blood vessel less. Mm-hmm. And then so blood pressure is reduced chronically. Acutely, when you exercise, blood pressure is increased because you need to produce a lot of force. But over time, it'll decrease, which is why a lot of the time if you have somebody with hypertension or high blood pressure, you just have to be careful, because if you elevate their blood pressure too much when they're exercising, it can be dangerous.
They pass out.
Yeah, something along those lines, yeah. But then over time, blood pressure will drop. So it's important that they do exercise, you just have to be careful about how you're doing it. I believe that is the last slide. Yeah. Any questions? All right, we ready to get into A&P2 material?
Let's do it.
Nice. All right, so the other lab is open. That was the only structured thing that we have for this lab. So if you guys, the rest of the time,